The rain came down in sheets that November evening, turning the city streets into rivers of reflected neon and broken dreams. Sarah Mitchell stood beneath the flickering awning of a closed bodega, watching a woman across the street huddle against a brick wall, a threadbare blanket pulled tight around shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Most people hurried past without a glance, umbrellas tilted against the wind, eyes fixed on their phones or the path ahead. But Sarah couldn't look away, because 10 years ago, that woman could have been her. The memory hit like a fist to the chest, the cold that seeped into your bones and never left, the hollow ache of hunger that became white noise, the way people's eyes would slide right past you as if you were invisible. Sarah remembered it all. The cardboard beneath her that never quite kept out the dampness, the shame that burned hotter than any shelter's heater, the desperate prayers whispered into the darkness of a city that never seemed to sleep, but never seemed to care either. She was 23 then, fresh off a Greyhound from Ohio with a suitcase full of dreams and a heart full of hope. The advertising job she'd been promised evaporated, like morning mist when the startup folded 2 weeks after she arrived. Her savings lasted 6 weeks. The streets claimed her by the 7th. She'd called her parents once, voice breaking, pride shattered. Her father's words still echoed in her memory. "You made your bed? Sarah, lie in it." The line went dead, and something inside her did too. But she survived. Not alone. Never alone. Though it felt that way in the darkest hours. There was Carmen, the night shift nurse who'd slip her leftover sandwiches and Band-Aids, without a word. There was Marcus at the shelter on 5th Avenue, who looked her in the eye like she was still human, still worthy, still here. There was Mrs. Chen at the corner store who'd let her use the bathroom, and never once called the cops. They didn't save her with grand gestures. They saved her with small mercies, repeated daily until she could breathe again, until she could fight again. Now, Sarah stood in designer shoes that cost more than she'd had to her name in those days, carrying a leather briefcase that held the presentation she'd deliver tomorrow at the marketing firm where she was partner. The transformation hadn't been miraculous. It had been brutal, inch by bleeding inch. Community college courses taken at night, a job washing dishes that led to waiting tables, a manager who saw something in her and took a chance. One opportunity leading to another, slowly, painfully, until one day she looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The rain intensified, and Sarah made a decision she'd been making in different ways for 10 years. She crossed the street, her heels clicking against wet pavement, and approached the woman against the wall. Up close, she could see the weather-worn face, the suspicious eyes that tracked her approach, the way the woman's hand tightened on the blanket as if it were armor. "Hey," Sarah said softly, crouching down despite her expensive suit. "I'm Sarah. Are you hungry?" The woman's jaw clenched. "Don't need your pity." "Not offering pity," Sarah replied. "I'm offering dinner. There's a diner 2 blocks from here. They serve until midnight. My treat, no strings." "Why?" The word was sharp, defensive. Sarah knew that tone. She'd used it herself once. "Because someone did it for me," Sarah said simply. "And maybe you tell me your story, or maybe you don't. Either way, let's get out of this rain." Something flickered in the woman's eyes, not trust exactly, but the exhausted willingness to take a chance when you have nothing left to lose. She nodded once, slowly, and let Sarah help her to her feet. Her name was Diana, 62 years old, though she looked older. Lost her teaching job when budget cuts decimated the school district. Lost her apartment 6 months later when her disability payments weren't enough to cover rent that kept climbing while her check stayed frozen. Lost her daughter to an overdose 3 years before that, a grief so profound it radiated from her like cold. They sat in a red vinyl booth at Mike's Diner, and Sarah watched Diana's hands shake as she brought the coffee cup to her lips. She'd ordered carefully at first, just soup. Nothing expensive, but Sarah had insisted. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, pie, real food. The kind that fills you up and reminds you what it means to be taken care of. "I was a good teacher," Diana said suddenly, staring at her plate. 28 years. I had students who'd write me letters years later, telling me I made a difference. I thought that mattered. I thought that would count for something when times got hard. Sarah's throat tightened. It does matter. It counted to those students. Doesn't keep the rain off, Diana said bitterly, but her voice cracked. They talked for 2 hours. Sarah listened as Diana unpacked her story. Not all of it. Wounds like that took time, but enough. The system that failed her. The friends who slowly disappeared when she could no longer keep up appearances. The shelters that were full or dangerous or both. The daily calculations of survival that left no room for anything else. When the check came, Sarah paid it without fanfare. But she didn't stop there. She couldn't. Because she'd learned something in her years of climbing back, that the real difference wasn't made in grand gestures, but in the decision to show up, again and again until change took root. "I need to ask you something," Sarah said as they stood outside the diner. The rain had gentled to a drizzle. "And I need you to really hear me. I run a marketing firm. We're expanding, and we need someone to manage our community outreach program. It's not teaching, but it uses those skills, connecting with people, understanding communities, building relationships. It pays a living wage. It comes with benefits, and I think you'd be incredible at it." Diana stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "You don't know me. I know you were a teacher for 28 years. I know you've survived things that would break most people. I know you're sitting here with a stranger instead of giving up, which means you're still fighting." Sarah pulled a business card from her wallet. "I'm not saying it'll be easy. There's paperwork, training, a probation period. You'd need to get an ID, maybe get some clothes for work. But I'll help with all of that, if you want it." "Why?" Diana's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah thought about Carmen and Marcus and Mrs. Chen. She thought about every small kindness that had built a bridge out of her darkness. She thought about the person she'd been and the person she'd become, and the vast distance between them crossed one helping hand at a time. "Because I believe in paying it forward," Sarah said. "Because I believe in second chances. Because I believe you deserve better than that wall and that blanket and the way this city has been treating you like you're invisible. Mostly because I've been where you are, and I remember what it felt like when someone saw me, really saw me, and decided I was worth the trouble." Diana's face crumpled. Tears came, hot and fierce, years of them. Sarah stepped forward and did something bold, something risky in a world that teaches us to keep our distance. She hugged her. And Diana, this woman who'd been invisible to a city of millions, who'd been discarded by a system that should have protected her, who'd been carrying more weight than any person should, have to bear alone, she hugged back. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Nothing ever is, not really. Diana had hard days. Ahead. The trauma of homelessness doesn't disappear with a job offer. But Sarah was there. She helped Diana navigate social services to get her documents. She connected her with a friend who ran a transitional housing program. She introduced her to the team at the firm, who welcomed her with the kind of warmth that comes from working in a place that values humans over profits. 6 months later, Diana sat in a small apartment with actual furniture, a cat named Hope, and walls covered in letters from the community members. She'd been helping through Sarah's outreach program. She'd reconnected with a sister she hadn't spoken to in 5 years. She'd started seeing a therapist who helped her process her grief. She'd begun to rebuild a life that felt like living rather than just surviving. And Sarah? She'd learned something she hadn't expected. That helping Diana had helped her too. That the girl who'd been invisible on these streets had transformed into a woman who could really see the humanity in others. That surviving wasn't enough. What mattered was what you did with that survival. How you used your second chance to create second chances for others. On the anniversary of that rainy November night, Sarah and Diana met at Mike's Diner. Same booth, same meatloaf special, same vinyl seats that had witnessed a turning point neither of them could have predicted. They'd both dressed up, not fancy, but nice. Intentional. A celebration. "I've been thinking," Diana said, setting down her fork, "about all those students who wrote me letters. About how I thought teaching was the most important thing I'd ever do. And then I lost it, and I thought I'd lost everything. And now?" Sarah prompted gently. "Now I think maybe losing everything was how I found what really mattered." Diana's eyes were clear, bright. "This program we're building, we've helped 32 people in 6 months. 32. That's 32 lives that might have turned around. 32 people who got seen." Sarah smiled, blinking back tears. 33, actually. You're forgetting yourself. They talked late into the evening, making plans for expanding the program, dreaming bigger dreams. Other diners came and went, unaware that two women in a vinyl booth were quietly changing their corner of the world, one act of kindness at a time, because that's how it works, really. Not with grand, dramatic gestures, though those have their place, but with the decision to stop, to see, to reach out, with the understanding that we're all one bad break away from needing help, and one good break away from being able to give it. With the recognition that humanity isn't just about surviving, it's about helping each other thrive. Outside, the city hummed on, indifferent and eternal. But in Mike's diner, two women who'd been invisible were now radiant with purpose, planning how to light the way for others still lost in the darkness. The rain had stopped. The night was clear. And somewhere in this city of millions, someone who needed to be seen would be seen tomorrow. Because today, two women decided that compassion wasn't optional, it was essential. That's what Sarah had learned, ultimately. That her wasn't just Diana, it was Carmen and Mrs. Chen and Marcus. It was every woman and man who'd been overlooked, stepped over, forgotten. It was the collective story of humanity at its best, not perfect, not always pretty, but persistently, stubbornly kind. And in a world that often felt cold and hard, that kindness was everything. It was the difference between darkness and light, between despair and hope, between a person and a statistic. It was, quite simply, the difference between merely existing and truly being alive.